The church with an overshot wheel. Lakelands, a quaint mountain village nestled amidst the Cumberland Range, wasn't the kind of place you'd find advertised in glossy travel brochures. It was a sleepy hamlet of 24 houses, seemingly lost in the vast expanse of pine woods. Its only link to the outside world a forlorn, narrow-gauge railroad line. Whether the railroad had stumbled upon Lakelands in its wanderings, or Lakelands had sought refuge along its tracks, remained a local mystery. The name Lakelands was another head-scratcher. Lakes were nowhere to be found, and the land itself was undeniably barren. Yet, there it was, clinging to its peculiar moniker, a testament to the whimsical nature of the place. Half a mile from the village, a grand old mansion, the Eagle House, stood proudly, offering respite to those seeking the rejuvenating mountain air. The Eagle House was a delightful relic of a bygone era, brimming with antiquated charm and a gentle air of disarray that felt oddly comforting. Clean rooms and ample food were the staples, while the rest, the beauty of the piney woods, the mineral spring, the swaying grapevine swings, even the rustic croquet set, were nature's gifts. The only artistic touch was the weekly fiddle and guitar music that echoed through the rustic pavilion during the local hops. The Eagle House attracted those seeking recreation as a necessity rather than a luxury. They were the busy souls, akin to clocks in need of a fortnight's winding to keep their wheels turning for a year. Students from nearby towns, the occasional artist or a geologist engrossed in deciphering the ancient strata of the hills, all found solace in Lakelands. Quiet families sought respite from the urban bustle, and, occasionally, one or two weary members of that dedicated sisterhood known to Lakelands as schoolmarms would arrive, seeking rejuvenation. A quarter of a mile from the Eagle House, a curiosity awaited those seeking local attractions, an old abandoned mill, which, according to Josiah Rankin, the Eagle House's owner, was the only church in the United States, with an overshot wheel, and the only mill in the world, with pews and a pipe organ. Every Sabbath, the Eagle House guests would attend this unique house of worship, listening to the preacher equate the purified Christian to bolted flour, ground to usefulness between the millstones of experience and suffering. Each year, as autumn approached, a man named Abram Strong would grace the Eagle House with his presence, a cherished and beloved guest. In Lakelands, he was affectionately known as Father Abram, a moniker bestowed upon him for his snow-white hair, strong and kindly countenance, booming laugh, and the priestly air emanating from his black clothes and broad hat. Even new guests, after a few days, found themselves adopting this familiar title. Father Abram came a long way to reach Lakelands. He resided in a bustling northwest town where he owned mills, not charming little mills with pews and organs, but colossal, hulking behemoths of industry, dwarfed only by the freight trains that crawled around them like ants on a mound. And it was here, in this bustling world of industry, that the story of Father Abram and the mill-turned-church began. Back when the church was a mill, Abram Strong was the miller, a jovial, dust-covered man, perpetually busy, yet undeniably happy. He lived in a cozy cottage across the road from the mill, his hands strong, his toll light, drawing mountaineers from miles around with their grain, navigating rocky roads to reach his mill. The miller's greatest joy was his daughter, Aglaia, a curious and endearing child with flaxen hair. The name, though somewhat grand for a toddler, was a testament to the mountaineer's love for sonorous, stately names. Aglaia, however, rejected the name in her everyday life, stubbornly insisting on being called Dums. The miller and his wife, baffled by this peculiar moniker, could never coax the source from their daughter. Finally, they arrived at a theory. A bed of rhododendrons in their garden held a special fascination for Aglaia. Perhaps she found a kinship with the formidable name of her favorite flowers in her self-chosen nickname. When Aglaia reached 4 years old, she and her father would engage in a heartwarming ritual every afternoon, weather permitting. As soon as supper was ready, her mother would brush her hair, tie on a clean apron, and send her across the road to the mill to fetch her father. The miller, his face and clothes dusted white from the flour, would greet her arrival with a wave and a rendition of an old miller's song known throughout the region. The wheel goes round, the grist is ground, the dusty miller's merry. He sings all day, his work is play, while thinking of his dearie. Aglaia, her laughter echoing through the mill, would run towards him calling, "Dada, come take Dums home." The miller would then scoop her up, placing her on his shoulder, and march homeward, the miller's song accompanying their steps. Every evening, this simple ritual would unfold. One day, a mere week after her 4th birthday, Aglaia vanished. Last seen plucking wildflowers by the side of the road, her mother had gone to check on her, only to find the little girl gone. Every effort was made to find her. Neighbors scoured the woods and mountains for miles, dragging the mill race and the creek below the dam. Not a single trace of her was found. A wandering family had camped in a nearby grove a few days prior, raising suspicions of foul play. Their wagon was searched, but Aglaia was nowhere to be found. For nearly 2 years, the miller clung to hope, searching relentlessly for his daughter. Eventually, however, his hope dwindled, and he and his wife moved to the bustling Northwest. Within a few years, he had built a modern mill in one of the region's important milling cities. Mrs. Strong never fully recovered from the loss of Aglaia, and 2 years after their move, the miller was left to grieve alone. As Abram Strong's wealth grew, he returned to Lakelands and the old mill. The sight filled him with a deep, sorrowful nostalgia. But, a strong man at heart, he always presented a cheerful and kindly face to the world. It was during this visit that he was inspired to transform the abandoned mill into a church. Lakelands, a poor community, was unable to build a church, and the even poorer mountaineers could not offer assistance. The nearest place of worship was 20 miles away. Abram Strong, with the utmost respect for its history, made minimal changes to the mill's exterior. The towering Overshot Wheel remained in its place, its soft wood slowly decaying, its surface etched with the initials of the young people who now frequented the church. The dam, partially destroyed, allowed the clear mountain stream to flow freely, cascading over its rocky bed. The interior, however, underwent a significant transformation. The shafts, millstones, belts, and pulleys were removed, replaced by 2 rows of benches with aisles, a small raised platform, and a pulpit at one end. A gallery on 3 sides, accessible by an internal staircase, provided additional seating. An ornate pipe organ, the pride of the Old Mill Church's congregation, graced the gallery. Miss Phoebe Summers, the organist, was the envy of many, while the boys of Lakelands took turns pumping the organ during Sunday services, a source of pride for them all. The Reverend Mr. Banbridge, riding in from Squirrel Gap on his old white horse, never missed a service. And Abram Strong footed the bill for everything, paying the preacher $500 a year and Miss Phoebe $200. The old mill, converted into a place of worship, served as a lasting tribute to Aglaia, her brief life bringing more good to the community than the combined years of many. Yet, Abram Strong sought another way to honor his daughter's memory. From his Northwest mills came Aglaia flour, made from the finest, most resilient wheat available. The country quickly learned that Aglaia flower had two prices, the highest market price and nothing. Whenever disaster struck, leaving communities destitute, fire, flood, tornado, strike, or famine, generous shipments of Aglaia flower at its nothing price would be rushed to the affected areas. It was a carefully planned, judiciously executed act of charity, a free offering, not a penny taken from those in need. A saying emerged: whenever a fire broke out in a city's impoverished districts, the fire chief's buggy would arrive first, followed by the Aglaia flower wagon, and then the fire engines. This, then, was Abram Strong's second monument to Aglaia, a tribute that, to some, might seem utilitarian and devoid of artistic beauty, but to others, the image of pure, virgin flower, flying on its mission of love and charity, was a poignant metaphor, a testament to the spirit of the lost child. One year, the Cumberlands were gripped by hardship. Crops were meager. Mountain floods had wrought destruction. And even the hunters, venturing into the woods, returned with barely enough game to sustain their families. Lakelands was particularly hard hit. As soon as Abram Strong heard of the dire situation, his messages flew, and the little narrow-gauge cars began unloading Aglaia flower at Lakelands. The miller's instructions were clear: store the flower in the old mill church's gallery, and let every churchgoer take a sack home. 2 weeks later, Abram Strong arrived for his annual visit to the Eagle House, once again becoming Father Abram. That season, the Eagle House had fewer guests than usual, one of whom was Rose Chester. She had traveled from Atlanta, where she worked in a department store. This was her first vacation, a gift from the store manager's wife, who had fond memories of her own time at the Eagle House. She had persuaded Rose to spend her 3-week holiday in Lakelands, providing a letter of introduction to Mrs. Rankin. Rose was delicate, pale, and frail, a product of her indoor life. But just 1 week in Lakelands transformed her, her spirit ignited by the mountain air and the breathtaking beauty of the Cumberlands. It was early September, the mountains ablaze with autumnal colors, the air crisp and invigorating, the nights cool and inviting, drawing those who sought refuge within the warm blankets of the Eagle House. Rose and Father Abram quickly struck up a friendship. The old miller, learning of her story from Mrs. Rankin, found himself drawn to the slender, solitary girl making her way in the world. The mountain country was new to Rose, a stark contrast to the flat, warm city she called home. She was determined to savor every moment, her meager savings meticulously budgeted, ensuring a small surplus for her return. Father Abram proved to be a wonderful friend and companion, his intimate knowledge of the mountains offering Rose a glimpse into their majestic beauty. Together, they explored the shadowy, tilted aisles of the pine forests, stood in awe before the bare crags, reveled in the crystal clarity of the mornings, and surrendered to the dreamy golden afternoons, their mysterious sadness a captivating allure. Rose's health improved, her spirits soared, and she discovered a laugh as warm and genuine, in its feminine way as Father Abram's own. Both were natural optimists, masters at presenting a cheerful face to the world, even in the face of adversity. One day, Rose overheard a guest recounting the tale of Father Abram's lost child. She rushed to find the miller, seated on his favorite rustic bench near the Chalibite spring, her hand reaching for his, her eyes welling with tears. "Oh, Father Abram," she said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know about your little daughter until today. You'll find her someday. I'm sure of it." The miller looked down at her, his smile strong and ever-present. "Thank you, Miss Rose," he said, his voice laced with a gentle sadness. "But I don't expect to find Aglaia. For years I clung to the hope she had been stolen, that she was still alive, but I've let go of that hope now. I believe she drowned." "I can understand," Rose said, her voice soft with empathy, "how that doubt must have made it so hard to bear. And yet, you are so cheerful, so ready to ease the burdens of others. Good Father Abram." "Good Miss Rose," the miller mimicked, his smile returning. "Who thinks of others more than you?" A whimsical thought struck Rose, a playful mood overtaking her. "Oh, Father Abram," she exclaimed, "wouldn't it be grand if I turned out to be your daughter? Wouldn't it be romantic? And wouldn't you like to have me as a daughter?" "Indeed, I would," the miller said, his voice full of warmth. "If Aglaia had lived, I could wish for nothing more than for her to have grown into a woman just like you. Maybe you are Aglaia," he continued, embracing the playful spirit of the moment. "Can't you remember when we lived at the mill?" Rose fell into a deep contemplation, her large eyes gazing into the distance, seemingly searching for a forgotten memory. Father Abram, amused by her swift shift to seriousness, watched her with a gentle smile. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice laced with a sigh. "No," she said, "I can't remember anything about a mill. I don't think I've ever seen a flour mill in my life until I saw your funny little church. And if I were your little girl, I would remember it, wouldn't I? I'm so sorry, Father Abram." "So am I," Father Abram said, humoringly indulging her. "But if you can't remember being my little girl, Miss Rose, surely you can recollect being someone else's. You remember your own parents, of course." "Oh, yes. I remember them very well, especially my father. He wasn't a bit like you, Father Abram. Oh, I was just pretending. Come now, you've rested long enough. You promised to show me the pool where you can see the trout playing this afternoon. I've never seen a trout." Late one afternoon, Father Abram set out for the old mill, walking alone, seeking solace in its familiar presence. He often went there to sit and reminisce about the days spent in the cottage across the road. Time had dulled the sharp edges of his grief, the memory of those days no longer painful. But whenever Abram Strong sat in the melancholy September afternoons on the spot where Dums used to arrive each day, her yellow curls bouncing as she ran, the smile that Lakelands knew so well would vanish. The miller made his way slowly up the winding, steep road, walking in the shade of the trees that pressed close to its edge, his hat in his hand. Squirrels scampered playfully along the old rail fence, and quails called to their young in the wheat stubble. The low sun cast a cascade of pale gold up the ravine opening to the west. Early September, just a few days away from the anniversary of Aglaia's disappearance. The old Overshot Wheel, half covered in mountain ivy, caught patches of the warm sunlight filtering through the trees. The cottage across the road stood, a weathered relic, destined to succumb to the next winter's mountain blasts. Morning glory and wild gourd vines had overrun it, the door hanging precariously on a single hinge. Father Abram pushed open the mill door and entered softly. He stopped, stunned. The sound of someone weeping uncontrollably reached his ears. He saw Rose, sitting in a dim pew, her head bowed over an open letter clutched in her hands. Father Abram walked towards her, placing his strong hand firmly on hers. She looked up, her eyes wide with tears, her lips forming his name. "Not yet, Miss Rose," the miller said kindly. "Don't try to talk yet. There's nothing better for you than a good, quiet cry when you're feeling blue." The old miller, who had known such deep sorrow himself, seemed to possess a magical ability to soothe the sorrows of others. Rose's sobs softened. She took her plain-bordered handkerchief and wiped away a stray tear that had fallen on Father Abram's hand. She looked up, a smile breaking through her tears. Rose, like Father Abram, could always smile before her tears had dried. In that way, they were strikingly alike. The miller didn't ask any questions, but eventually, Rose began to share her story, the story that always seemed so monumental and important to the young, that evoked reminiscent smiles in those who had lived a little longer. It was a story of love, of course. A young man in Atlanta, brimming with goodness and grace, had discovered that Rose possessed those qualities above all others, both in Atlanta and beyond. She showed Father Abram the letter that had brought her to tears, a heartfelt and eloquent letter, a touch over the top and urgent, written by a young man full of goodness and grace. He proposed, begging for an immediate answer, promising to fly to Lake Lands, ignoring the narrow-gauge railroad if his proposal was accepted. "And where does the trouble come in?" the miller asked, after reading the letter. "I can't marry him," Rose said. "Do you want to marry him?" Father Abram asked. "Oh, I love him," she answered, her head drooping, her voice choked with tears. "But—" "Come, Miss Rose," the miller said. "You can confide in me. I won't pry, but I think you can trust me." "I do trust you," the girl said. "I'll tell you why I have to refuse Ralph. I'm nobody. I don't even have a name. The one I use is a lie. Ralph is a good man. I love him with all my heart, but I can never be his." "What's this talk?" Father Abram said, bewildered. "You said you remember your parents. Why do you say you have no name? I don't understand." "I do remember them," Rose said, her voice trembling. "I remember them too well. My earliest memories are of our life in the far south. We moved so many times, from town to town, state to state. I've picked cotton, worked in factories, gone without enough food and clothes. My mother was sometimes good to me. My father was always cruel, beating me. I think they were both idle and restless. One night, when we were living in a town on a river near Atlanta, they had a terrible fight. It was during that fight, while they were abusing and taunting each other, that I learned, oh, Father Abram, I learned that I didn't even have the right to be. Don't you understand? I had no right even to a name. I was nobody. I ran away that night. I walked to Atlanta and found work. I gave myself the name Rose Chester, and I've been earning my own living ever since. Now you know why I can't marry Ralph. And oh, I can never tell him why." Father Abram's response, more helpful than pity, more reassuring than sympathy, was a dismissal of her worries. "Why, dear, is that all?" He said, Fie, I thought something was in the way. If this perfect young man is a man at all, he won't care a pinch of bran for your family tree. Dear Miss Rose, take my word for it, it's yourself he cares for. Tell him frankly, just as you've told me, and I'll warrant he'll laugh at your story and think all the more of you for it." "I'll never tell him," Rose said, her voice tinged with sadness. "And I'll never marry him or anyone else. I don't have the right." But a long shadow appeared, bobbing along the sunlit road, followed by a shorter one, and soon two figures approached the church. The long shadow belonged to Miss Phoebe Summers, the organist, on her way to practice. Tommy Teague, 12 years old, responsible for pumping the organ, was the source of the shorter shadow, his bare toes kicking up dust as he walked. Miss Phoebe, in her lilac spray chintz dress, her precise curls framing her face, curtsied gracefully to Father Abram and gave a ceremonious shake of her curls to Rose. She and her assistant climbed the steep staircase to the organ loft. In the gathering shadows below, Father Abram and Rose lingered, a silence falling between them. They were lost in thought, revisiting their memories. Rose sat, her head resting on her hand, her eyes fixed on a distant point. Father Abram stood in the next pew, gazing thoughtfully at the road and the ruined cottage. Suddenly, the scene transformed for Father Abram, whisking him back nearly 2 decades into the past. As Tommy pumped, Miss Phoebe struck a low bass note on the organ, holding it to test the air pressure. For Father Abram, the church vanished, replaced by the hum of the mill machinery. He felt the old Overshot Wheel turning, felt himself back in the dusty, bustling mill, the merry miller of long ago. Evening approached, and soon Aglaia, her yellow curls flying, would toddle across the road, ready to take him home to supper. Father Abram's eyes fixed on the broken door of the cottage. And then, another wonder. In the gallery above, sacks of flour stood in long rows. Perhaps a mouse had nibbled at one of them. Whatever the cause, the deep, vibrating organ note shook loose a stream of flour, cascading down the cracks of the gallery floor, covering Father Abram from head to foot in white dust. The old miller stepped into the aisle, his arms waving, and began to sing the miller's song. The wheel goes round, the grist is ground, the dusty miller's merry. And then the rest of the miracle unfolded. Rose leaned forward from her pew, her face as pale as the flower, her wide eyes fixed on Father Abram, as if in a waking dream. As he began the song, she stretched out her arms towards him, her lips moving, calling out to him in a dreamy voice, "Dada, come take Dums home!" Miss Phoebe released the low organ key, her task completed. The note she had struck had shattered the walls of a long-buried memory, and Father Abram held his lost Aglaia close in his arms. Those who visit Lakelands today will hear more of this story, told with a mix of awe and wonder. They will learn how the pieces of the puzzle were later uncovered. The story of the miller's daughter revealed after the wandering gypsies had stolen her on that September day, drawn to her captivating beauty. But one should wait until seated comfortably on the shaded porch of the Eagle House before delving into the full tapestry of the tale. Here, our story reaches its climax as the lingering reverberations of Miss Phoebe's deep bass note fade. And yet, the most beautiful moment, to my mind, occurred as Father Abram and his daughter made their way back to the Eagle House in the long twilight, their hearts overflowing with joy, their words few and hesitant. "Father?" Aglaia asked, her voice tinged with a mixture of timidity and uncertainty. "Do you have a lot of money?" "A lot?" The miller said, "Well, that depends. There's plenty, unless you want to buy the moon or something equally expensive." "Would it cost a lot? A very, very lot?" Aglaia asked, a girl who had always carefully counted her dimes. "To send a telegram to Atlanta?" "Ah," Father Abram said, a soft sigh escaping his lips. "I see. You want to ask Ralph to come." Aglaia looked up at him, her eyes filled with tenderness. "I want to ask him to wait," she said. "I just found my father, and I want it to be just us two for a while. I want to tell him he'll have to wait." The tale of the mill-turned church, a testament to a father's love and a daughter's return, echoed through the mountains. A whisper carried on the breeze, a story whispered from one generation to the next, a poignant reminder that even in the most unlikely of places, miracles can happen. The end. If you like the story, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was there anything that surprised you? Who's your favorite character in the story? I can't wait to hear your thoughts.